Welcome to this deep dive, tailored specifically for you, the learner. Today, we're venturing into something, well, almost everyone feels it, but few really get it. The fear of intimacy. We're thinking about it not just as, an emotion, but almost like an architecture inside us. Why can getting close feel so tricky, especially now when we're supposedly hyper-connected?
It's a huge paradox, isn't it? I mean, we have these devices, right? They give this illusion of being constantly in touch.
Yeah.
But that very closeness, it can feel strangely, well, isolating. It's a bit like being in a packed subway car, maybe.
Right.
Surrounded by people, but you feel completely alone, proximity, but no real encounter.
Exactly. It makes me think of like an aquarium. We're all swimming around in the same tank. We see each other, maybe tap on the glass now, and
Yeah.
do a quick like or something.
Surface level.
Yeah, but there's this invisible wall stopping real connection. The key thing here, the learner, is that this feeling close but distant, it isn't just some modern tech thing. It's more fundamental.
And if we look at it from, say, a Gestalt perspective, think about figure and ground. What grabs our attention, the figure versus the background, the ground?
Okay.
So the figure might be all those texts, the social media stuff,
Yeah.
the visible signs we're connected.
Right, the notifications.
Exactly. But the ground, the bit we often ignore, that's the emotional distance. The anxieties, the boundaries we don't talk about. That's what's really shaping things. We focus on the look of connection.
And miss the reality underneath.
Precisely. We miss the deeper emotional truth.
So we end up building these emotional bubbles around ourselves almost without thinking.
Yeah, sort of protective layers, but the irony is they can trap us.
Right, they keep us in those shallow interactions we say we don't want. The big takeaway here, the learner, seems to be that these bubbles, meant to keep us safe.
Can actually keep us profoundly lonely. Think about someone like, let's call her Anna. Really successful executive, huge network, knew everyone.
Okay, connected on paper.
Totally. But then, in the quiet moments, evenings, weekends, this deep loneliness would hit her.
Wow.
Her emotional bubble, probably built up from, I don't know, past hurts, fears she hadn't faced. It was so much a part of her she didn't even see it.
Until those empty moments.
Exactly, until the quiet made it obvious. These bubbles, you see, they often mirror our own inner world, protecting the vulnerable spots.
Which brings us right to that core puzzle, doesn't it? If we're biologically wired for connection, why do we flinch? Why pull back when closeness is right there? What's the real conflict?
Well, from that Gestalt angle again, we might think about unfinished business.
Unfinished business. Old baggage.
Sort of, yeah. Unresolved emotions, relationships that didn't conclude properly, experiences from the past that still linger. They're still active in the background.
Okay.
So when intimacy gets near, when someone starts to get close, this stuff tends to bubble up. It kind of demands attention.
Ah, so the past intrudes on the present.
It does. And fear, in that situation, it acts like a gatekeeper. It's trying to stop us from having to deal with all that unresolved stuff.
So the learner should understand this push-pull isn't random. It's often linked to our history.
Very much so. It's often deeply rooted.
It's like magnets then.
Yeah.
Pulled together but pushed apart at the same time.
That's a good analogy, yeah. Attraction and repulsion existing together. This fear of intimacy. It's a defense mechanism, trying to keep us psychologically stable, maybe.
But there's a cost, right?
Oh, absolutely. A big cost. And it feels like technology just pours fuel on this fire sometimes.
How so?
Well, think about online life. We create these perfect versions of ourselves, right? Curated personas.
The highlight reel.
Exactly. And friendships can feel a bit performative. We're chasing likes, comments, validation metrics that deep down often feel pretty empty.
Yeah, hollow.
Precisely. Online, we can get trapped in this distorted cycle. We're always mobilizing, reaching out, sending a message, posting something.
Putting energy out there.
Yeah, but often without the satisfaction, the real closure, or the genuine encounter that you get from, proper face-to-face contact.
So the natural rhythm gets messed up.
It can, yeah. That cycle of reaching out, really connecting, maybe having a bit of conflict even.
Yeah.
And then withdrawing to process it all. Online interaction can sometimes just short-circuit that whole thing.
The key insight being that digital connection isn't always real connection.
It can sometimes get in the way of it.
Okay, now here's a thought that kind of flips things. What if this fear, this intimacy thing, isn't mainly about other people?
Go on.
What if it's really fundamentally about our relationship with ourselves. The core takeaway, the learner, maybe our discomfort with others is just reflecting a discomfort inside.
That's a really crucial point. I think that's absolutely right. When we pull back from someone getting close,
Yeah.
maybe we're also subconsciously trying to avoid our own vulnerabilities, the bits of ourselves we haven't really accepted or figured out yet.
So the emotional bubble isn't just keeping others out.
It's also acting like a mirror, reflecting back those parts of our inner world we haven't quite embraced.
Wow. Okay. So how do we start to deal with that? How do we move beyond these bubbles? You mentioned architecture of intimacy.
Yes, let's think about it structurally. Intimacy isn't just a feeling, it's shaped by how we interact with our environment, with others, what Gestalt calls the field. And this architecture, it kind of unfolds in stages.
Okay, stages. Where does it begin? What's stage one?
Stage one is what we call mobilization. This is when that desire for connection starts to stir. But at the same time, you become aware of the roadblocks inside yourself, the things holding you back.
Like standing at the edge of a dark forest. You know you want to go in, but hesitation.
Exactly that image. You feel the pull, but also the resistance. The key thing here, the learner, is that the desire and the fear often pop up together.
It's that moment when maybe a feeling you've ignored needing closeness suddenly comes into sharp focus. It becomes the figure.
Right, demands attention.
But almost instantly, you feel that tightening, that urge to step back.
And the fear at this point, it's not just noise, it's actually information, really valuable information.
Information. How?
It's signaling those unresolved tensions we talked about. If, say, your past taught you that being vulnerable gets you hurt,
Yeah.
then that fear is a message. It's a warning sign based on past experience.
So it loops back to that unfinished business again. Old stuff getting triggered as we try to move forward.
Exactly. It nudges us or sometimes shoves us towards awareness, but actually allowing those feelings to surface, just acknowledging them, that can feel incredibly difficult.
It really can.
Think of maybe someone like Sarah. She had this intense anxiety about talking about her childhood.
Okay.
And it turned out it was deeply connected to unprocessed grief about her parents' divorce. For her, the first step in mobilization, before she could even think about sharing it, was just admitting to herself, okay, this is tense, this brings up feelings.
Just acknowledging the tension, allowing it to be the figure instead of shoving it back down into the ground.
That's the crucial first step.
Okay. So we've mobilized. We feel the desire. We feel the barriers. What's next in this architecture? Stage two.
Stage two is action, actually doing something, stepping over that line into vulnerability.
Moving from thinking about it to engaging.
Yes, shifting from potential to actual. But, and this is key, real action in this sense means being present, not stuck worrying about the past or rehearsing the future. The takeaway, learner, is intention needs that authentic engagement to follow.
So intimacy becomes like a dance. You have to be tuned in.
Very much like a dance, responding to each other's rhythm. It's not just, saying the words, but aligning your inner state with the reality of the other person, creating that space where contact can happen.
But fear can mess this up too, right? Sabotage.
Absolutely. Fear at this stage often shows up as falling back on old, rigid patterns, ways of relating that feel safe but keep people at arm's length.
Like deflection.
Yeah, or maybe like John. He always used humor or like super intellectual arguments to dodge expressing any real feelings.
So his action was connection, but only surface level, avoiding the vulnerable bit.
Exactly. He was avoiding true vulnerability. That often points to a lack of what we might call ground support.
Ground support meaning?
That inner stability, that self-trust that lets you explore vulnerable territory without feeling like you're going to fall apart.
Okay, like feeling solid enough inside to handle whatever comes up.
Precisely. Without that fundamental confidence, we tend to just snap back to those old avoidance tactics. Building that ground support, it involves noticing the fear, saying, okay, I feel scared right now.
Acknowledging it.
Acknowledging it, but then choosing not to let it run the show. Choosing the action anyway.
So for John, maybe learning to notice that knot in his stomach when things got personal. And instead of making a joke, maybe saying, wow, I'm feeling a bit anxious talking about this. That's building ground support and taking real action.
Exactly. That's stepping towards genuine contact. Which brings us to stage 3. Contact.
Okay, contact, the destination.
Well, it's sort of the destination of that particular movement. It's not just being in the same room. It's that deeper meeting, that moment of really honest, full encounter.
Where the walls come down a bit.
Yeah, the boundaries soften temporarily. You allow for a shared experience, a shared Gestalt. It's that feeling of truly being seen and truly seeing the other person.
Yeah.
The core of contact, learner, is just authentic presence.
You mentioned rivers merging earlier. Like that.
That's a beautiful image for it, yes. Creating something new together in that moment.
But it's not always smooth sailing, you said. There can be friction.
Often, yes, because real contact forces us to face those parts of ourselves we usually keep tucked away. Remember isomorphism?
Vaguely. The inner world mirroring the outer.
Right. The structure inside tends to show up in our relationships. So if you've got unresolved anger or sadness inside, it's going to color that moment of contact. It has to.
Like Emily. You mentioned her. Relationships ending badly.
Right. It wasn't just bad luck with partners. It traced back to this unconscious belief she held, maybe from childhood, that love always had strings attached, that it wasn't safe.
Oh.
And that belief unconsciously shaped how she acted in contact, pushing people away before they could, in her mind, inevitably hurt her.
So contact forces those hidden dynamics out into the open.
It does. It can strip away the usual masks and defenses. It shows us the raw truth of our patterns. It can be really uncomfortable,
I bet.
but also incredibly liberating. You know, Carl Rogers said, "What is most personal is most universal." When we face our stuff in contact, we often find common ground.
Okay. So we've mobilized, acted, made contact.
Yeah.
Possibly with some friction. What's stage 4?
Stage 4 is transformation. This is where we start to integrate what happened. We take the insights, the feelings from that genuine contact, and let them change us, reshape our understanding.
Like putting puzzle pieces together. Suddenly seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly like that aha moment. The key here, learner, is actually integrating what we learned or felt in that contact moment, not just having the experience and moving on unchanged.
It's that sudden insight, seeing connections you missed before.
Right. Think of Marcus. He kept getting really jealous in relationships.
Okay.
Through real contact and reflection, he had this insight. Wow, this isn't about wanting what they have. It's about my own deep longing for connection that feels unmet.
That's a huge shift.
Huge. And that kind of insight allows us to question the old stories we tell ourselves about relationships, the ones that maybe aren't helping anymore.
And this is where closure fits in too, dealing with that unfinished business.
Yes, resolving it becomes possible here, not necessarily ending things, but finding resolution. Apologizing, forgiving ourselves or others, letting go of old hurts, it frees up so much energy.
Okay, makes sense. Freeing up energy for healthier patterns.
Hmm.
And stage 5, you said it was often misunderstood.
Yes, stage 5 is withdrawal.
Withdrawal. That sounds like the opposite of intimacy, like pulling away again.
It can look like that, but it's not necessarily avoidance. Healthy withdrawal is actually a vital part of the cycle.
How so?
It's the pause, the time needed to rest, reflect, and integrate after the intensity of real contact and potential transformation. Think of the silence between notes in music.
Ah, okay. It gives the notes meaning.
Exactly, it gives resonance. The core function of withdrawal, learner, is integration, taking it all in.
So taking space to process, get your balance back, maybe even sparks creativity, seeing things fresh.
All of those things. It helps restore equilibrium. Now, the crucial distinction is between this healthy withdrawal, which is usually intentional, maybe even communicated, and avoidance.
Which is fear-driven.
Right. Fear-driven, often sudden, unexplained, and it leaves the other person feeling confused or abandoned.
Like Lisa. Learning to say during a tense discussion, hey, I need like 10 minutes to cool down and think, then let's talk.
Perfect example. That transforms withdrawal from a weapon or an escape hatch into part of a constructive process. It builds strength.
Okay, so mobilization, action, contact, transformation, withdrawal. That's the cycle.
That's the basic architecture. And what's really interesting is seeing how through all 5 stages, we're constantly moving between feeling whole and feeling fragmented. It mirrors the whole ebb and flow of intimacy itself.
So growth happens right there at that edge between comfort and, well, maybe a bit of chaos.
That's often where the juice is, yes,
Yeah.
navigating that balance. That's where real intimacy can start to bloom.
And it brings us back to the fear again, that fear of intimacy.
Yeah.
It's protective, you said.
It serves a purpose initially. It guards us until we feel ready, maybe unconsciously, to step beyond those familiar boundaries.
But the challenge is knowing when that protection becomes a prison.
Exactly. When does the bodyguard become the jailer?
This whole thing keeps circling back, doesn't it? to the idea that this fear, fundamentally, it's about us, our relationship with ourselves.
I really believe that's the heart of it. It aligns with that Gestalt idea of the self not being fixed, but a process, always changing through interaction. When we fear intimacy, often we're actually resisting the parts of ourselves that getting close brings bubbling to the surface, the parts that demand our attention.
So those emotional bubbles aren't just walls against others.
Right.
They're like magnifying glasses for our own insecurities.
In a way, yes. It's not just what will they think or will they hurt me. It can be a deeper fear of seeing our own fragility, our own messiness reflected back.
Wow. So the paradox is, the closer we get to someone else,
The closer we inevitably have to get to ourselves. Intimacy is this incredibly powerful mirror.
reflecting strengths and shadows.
Both. And avoiding connection can be sometimes a way to avoid seeing ourselves too clearly, to avoid that self-revelation.
Like Tom, you mentioned him fearing silence.
Right. He realized the quiet wasn't just awkward. It forced him to confront his own inner noise, that baseline loneliness he was always running from.
So where we feel resistance, that's where the growth potential lies.
Often, yes. Our capacity for intimacy really expands when we're willing to lean into that discomfort, to be vulnerable. Which takes humility, right? Accepting we're not perfect, we're incomplete.
This view feels very different from, say, the typical Western idea of romance novels, two perfect halves making a whole.
It does challenge that, yes. This Gestalt view emphasizes interconnectedness. We're not separate islands trying to build a bridge. We're already part of the same ocean, the same field.
It sounds a bit like
Yeah.
Eastern ideas, interbeing.
Exactly. It resonates strongly with concepts like interbeing, this understanding that nothing exists in isolation. Everything is relational. Intimacy, then, isn't two separate I's becoming a we. It's more like a co-creation, a dance within that shared field where both influence and are influenced.
But recognizing that connection, that deep interconnectedness, could actually make the fear worse for some people, couldn't it?
Absolutely, because it involves letting go.
Letting go of control.
Of control, of the illusion of separateness, trusting that you won't just dissolve or lose yourself entirely in the connection.
Like standing at the ocean's edge, feeling the tide pull.
That tension, the desire to merge versus the need to stay distinct to maintain autonomy, it's a fundamental human tension.
So maybe the most profound insight here is, well, it sounds backwards, but maybe to overcome the fear of intimacy, we first need to accept our own aloneness.
It is counterintuitive, isn't it? But think of the astronaut again. Tethered, yes, connected to Earth, but also profoundly alone in the vastness.
Okay.
Our ability to connect really deeply might actually depend on our ability to stand firmly in our own subjective experience, to tolerate our ultimate aloneness.
It reminds me of that paradoxical theory of change you mentioned.
Yeah.
Change happens when we accept what is, not strive to be something else.
Exactly. If we accept our aloneness, maybe we stop desperately searching for someone to erase it, which is an impossible task.
And that frees us up.
It could free us up to engage in real, imperfect connection, rather than chasing an illusion of perfect union.
So intimacy isn't about melting boundaries completely.
No, it's more about honoring them, knowing where you end and they begin, but still building bridges across that space, reaching across.
On the fear of intimacy itself.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not the enemy after all.
Perhaps it's the guide, pointing towards the work that needs doing, pointing towards growth.
So when we feel that anxiety, that urge to pull back, maybe it's not just stop, danger.
Maybe it's also an invitation, a hidden call to explore something deeper within ourselves, within our patterns. The challenge is learning to listen to that call.
Which leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it? If intimacy is both mirror and doorway, what do we find on the other side? Is it really the other person, or just more fragments of ourselves?
And is true closeness possible without losing that essential mystery, that uniqueness that makes us who we are?
It really feels like intimacy isn't some peak we conquer.
Yeah.
It's a journey, constantly unfolding.
Always unfolding. Every connection adds layers, deepens understanding, but maybe never captures the full complexity. That's the beauty, perhaps, but also the burden of it. It promises so much, yet always remains slightly elusive.
Maybe the goal isn't to beat the fear. Maybe it's learning to walk alongside it.
To see it as a window into the undiscovered parts of our own soul. And perhaps, just perhaps, the deepest intimacy we can find is with our own constantly shifting, evolving self.
So as you, the learner, sit with all this deep dive into intimacy and fear through that Gestalt lens, think about those questions. How does that emotional bubble idea land with you? Does it feel familiar?
Yeah, and what unfinished business might be quietly shaping your own connections right now, even in small ways.
Maybe the biggest takeaway, though, is just reframing the fear, seeing it not just as a negative thing to get rid of.
But potentially as a compass, a guide pointing towards self-awareness, towards a kinder understanding of why we relate the way we do.
Well, we really hope this exploration has sparked some new thoughts, maybe a few aha moments for you. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Yeah, thank you. We definitely encourage you to keep mulling over these ideas, see how they resonate in your own life and your own relationships.